I have always loved traveling to colonial Williamsburg. When I was in my early 20s, I was captured by the incredible spirit of liberty in the air. It's an amazing place that has spent its philanthropic mission telling the story of the former colonial capital of Virginia. It's a unique area, suspended in time, where you can hear Patrick Henry orate about his thoughts and life right alongside Thomas Jefferson. I've always loved history, but that first adventure I took there spurred something in me of profound awakening. I found myself attracted to the Enlightenment and the concepts of natural law. Certainly, Williamsburg is a romanticized version of the colonial era, but every time I go, I find a conversation around liberty and revolution that is compelling and beautiful. Regardless of the 21st century interpretation of that time, there are some undeniable truths and people of mythological proportion that come from that era. The brilliant minds that were in confluence on this isolated continent 3,000 miles from their homeland is nothing short of a historic miracle of providence. Among those people placed perfectly in time on this young continent, Thomas Jefferson is among the most interesting to me. His brilliance with the pen and his consistent dedication to the fundamentals of natural law throughout the founding are always worthy of a study. Regardless of our 21st century projections upon his flaws, his words and thinking are still fundamentally the flame that motivates our concepts of government, life, entrepreneurship, and rugged individualism. From our perspective as people 250 years removed from this moment, the founding seems like a time that was filled with what must have been overwhelming oppression by the king. We believe in modernity that the force must certainly have been more brutal, more imposing, and more affront to the colonists. We think of ourselves as the heirs to this revolt, left with a good government that was the result of a heroic people, and that the disruption to the world they caused is no longer needed. The principles of the Declaration of Independence and the ordering laid out in the Constitution certainly have preserved their good government, and we live a free life with the powerful in check and the people's voice first and foremost in the minds of our representatives. But our 21st century world has become increasingly bizarre. What was once considered unbelievable is now the standard fare for the day. A world at war, a people divided, and a government that is drunk with power and brutality. The Jeffersonian flame has become but an ember of what once was, and our citizenry is downtrodden, reaved of its liberty, and partite of its founding principles. The founding documents seem like fading rational thoughts and ideas that have no pull on an irrational people. Perhaps it's too late. Waving our Constitution at the evildoers and shadowy figures in the bureaucracies has no impact on their governance. They raise their brutality and retribution on the honest, and take their handouts and kickbacks from the powerful. The government we have wrought is a self-imposed prison, a place where the locks on our doors are only to keep out the honest people. But I do have a glimmer of hope when I return to the ideals of Jefferson. Most everyone had to memorize, in the rote prisons of education, the preamble to the Declaration, but a small few actually have read the entire document. The beautiful language that spells out the principles of natural rights and inherency of people over power is certainly the groundwork for the rebellion that has left us with this nation of America. But with a little energy and time, one can also find out that there is an inherent nature to the power that they were rejecting in the founding as well. There are 27 grievances in the Declaration, 27 reasons as to why this long train of abuses was enough for the colonists to give up their lives, fortunes, and sacred honors. These abuses were real. They were fundamental assaults on the colonies and her peoples. They were enough to change the course of history and realign the order of the world from king and subject to the individual. I would posit the thought, however, that most Americans have never read the grievances that are the very things that pushed the founders to the edge and caused a revolution. In our upside-down time, filled with a once again oppressive government, there is value in understanding what caused this transformational reordering of the world. Here are just a few of them, so that, as Jefferson noted, let facts be submitted to a candid world. Grievance number 1. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. The king refused to ratify the laws the colonists or parliament made about the colonies, decimating self-government and causing the people to feel their voices were irrelevant. They were second-class citizens as British subjects. How many times have the people of the modern United States petitioned for common-sense laws regarding the border, immigration, money, wars, property, only to be silenced at the legislature, or worse, overturned at the courts by an unelected oligarchy? Grievance 10. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. The federal, state, county, and city governments of America are rife with offices and officers that cause the people of the land to ask permissions for nearly any aspect of life. What they can do with their business, their land, their children, their money, are all subjected to an unelected officer who has been appointed by a politician long vacant from that office. Law upon law and rule after rule are created and enforced upon the citizens, and a prison of words and fear keep the people compliant and demotivated. Grievance 12. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Modern America is a military state. Every political decision is no longer subject to the civil authority. The commander-in-chief, a supposed civilian, is at the mercy of the military or the industries that support it. No modern president has control over the military, and war is never governed or consented to by legislatures. The military is its own cancerous Borg that has replaced the liberty soul of the nation with one that is hell-bent for destruction, oppression, and war. Grievance 13. He is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Our involvement in the G7, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, United Nations, NATO, and other pseudo-governments create rules and regulations we are subjected to without representative consent. No citizen alive in America has ever been represented by an elected person at these powerful groups. Our citizens live and abide by these institutions' thoughts, ideas, and power, having never surrendered in representation to these authorities. Grievance 15. For protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. In the founding, this grievance was about the British military, but in our era, there is no question that there is a different tier of justice for the citizens and the well-connected. There are mock trials for them, but no one in government ever really goes to jail for their sinister deeds. The average person can be arrested and convicted in a matter of moments in the surveillance state, but the client list for Jeffrey Epstein is still mysteriously missing. There is no justice if people are not subjected to equality before the law. Grievance 17. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. The government tax code is hideous. New rules are created each year, and the people of the country are at the mercy of a voluntary system that makes examples out of the honest, and a mockery of the system by those who are wealthy enough to exploit it. The codes are written by the very people who should be paying the most, and they find a way to punish those who cannot afford the lawyers or accountants to navigate the maze. A fundamental principle of self-governance is that no representative body can bind another body to their taxes. A Congress from 1917 should not be allowed to bind Congress from 2022 to the same taxes without new consent. America does nothing of the sort. We are bound by rules from people who have long ago left the legislature by retirement or removal by vote, yet the people, regardless of their wishes, are still bound by their taxes. We are no longer represented in this very significant place. Grievance 18. For depriving us in many cases of the benefit of a jury trial. In America today, the process of going to court is the punishment. It is an expensive, lengthy process that is regulated by fear and fear alone. Juries are a diminishing aspect of any court, and judges or prosecutors are the ones making the justice. Most cases are settled or adjudicated by a single judge. Very few actually make it to trial where their case can be heard by a jury of their peers. There is no speedy trial in our system. It is stretched out on purpose so that people will self-convict and the state will grow its influence. Grievance 22. For suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. There has been a pressing move towards government consolidation since the 1900s. Centralized power in Washington has become the principal method in which all other governments are subjected to. State and local governments are subservient to the will of Washington, in effect making local legislation simply clarification of rules passed by the power brokers in the nation's capital. Our legislatures are in effect suspended, beholden to the will of one central state, and we can only effect change to the implementations of the laws. Rights are usurped consistently, and local and state laws are frequently overturned by the courts, insisting that the real rules come from one centralized, powerful federal government. Grievance 25. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Leading up to the revolution, the king had hired Germans to come fight the colonists so that British citizens did not have to harm their fellow countrymen. The Germans, in theory, could fight without conscience, British subjects without guilt or internal conflict. Today, America is the foreign mercenaries in far-off lands, causing harm and destruction, while our citizenry are removed from the horrors of war on the ground. We send monies and material to corporate foreign governments, and then bring our bullied selves to the brink of war with those same governments, all removed from the guilty conscience of the American people. The media and politicians insist upon these mercenary wars for the safety of our nation, all the while creating the very blowback that is destructive to our citizenry. A word long lost in the dumbing down of our people is perfidy, the idea that in trickery, one side in conflict promises to act in good faith, with the intention all along of breaking the promise once the other side complies. This kind of behavior is the basis for American foreign policy today. We consistently make promises to others, then break them when they act upon that promise. This is what has become of a once decent people. The dark forces by alphabet agencies that deceive the world and use our once high moral credibility to puppeteer behaviors in other governments' interests and live in a perpetual state of war crimes. These are just a few of what Jefferson and his peers found egregious enough to overturn the order of the king and the British Empire. All of the grievances, in some way, are being done to us today in our own elected governments. It should be time to consider the darkness that we face. Perhaps it is even time to revolt against the entire machine and send it packing into the same hinterlands as the British Crown in 1776 America. There may be time to save it if we are dedicated to it. Self-government requires our response, requires our dedication, requires our disobedience to tyrannical impulses. It mandates our insistence that natural, inherent laws of humanity and of governments be attended to. Individualism will always be opposed to government, and government will always be opposed to the individual. It is a natural conflict that can be healthy and beneficial when a people understand it requires diligence and attentiveness to this tension. The founders understood that, and hoped we could keep Jefferson's flame alight with enough understanding and dedication to their ideals.